see it.
I'm writing this because the silence in this house has become a physical weight, and if I don't get the sequence of events down on paper or a screen, I'm afraid I'll lose the thread of my own sanity. Laura and I were the golden couple of our circle. Early 20s, stable careers, a house with a garden she actually managed to keep alive. When the test came back positive last April, we didn't just celebrate, we exhaled. It felt like the final piece of the puzzle. But by week 10, the light in her eyes started to dim. It wasn't morning sickness. She described it as a hollowing out. She told me once, over a half-touch bowl of soup, that she felt like she was being consumed from the inside, not nurtured, but harvested. I told her it was hormones. I told her she was just scared. I was a supportive husband, which is often just code for being dismissive with a smile. When the miscarriage happened, it was violent. The doctors called it a spontaneous abortion, a clinical term for a domestic massacre. Laura was devastated, or so she acted. But in the quiet moments when she thought I was asleep, I saw her face in the vanity mirror. It wasn't grief. It was the look of a prisoner who had just watched their cell door swing open. She looked relieved. I hated myself for noticing it. Then the sound started. It began with the monitor. We hadn't turned it off. It was still plugged into the outlet in the nursery we'd started painting. At night, a rhythmic, wet scratching would come through the speakers. Like a dog's claws on hardwood, but softer. Fetal. Laura stopped sleeping. She'd sit in the dark, staring at the wall, whispering, "He knows. He knows what I did to you." She told me she saw him. Not a ghost, but a shadow with too many joints, crouching in the corner of our room, silently blaming her. She said he was furious that she had ejected his physical vessel before he was ready to be born. I tried to get her into grief counseling, but she just looked at me with those hollowed-out eyes and said, "You can't counsel away a debt, Mark." I was so worried, I tried to get her to doctors, into therapy, told her to go out with her friends. I just wanted her to be normal again, to be her. 3 weeks ago, Laura went to the grocery store. She texted me at 4:12 p.m. asking if we needed lemons. At 4:45 p.m., I got a call from a detective. Witnesses say she was standing in the produce aisle when she simply opened up. There was no warning. It wasn't a slow bleed, it was a flood. She collapsed in seconds. By the time the paramedics reached her, she was gone. The autopsy report is something I've read 100 times, and it never makes more sense. The medical examiner pulled me aside, looking pale. He said he'd never seen anything like it. Her uterus wasn't just hemorrhaging, it was shredded. He used the word avulsed. It looked as though someone, or something, had reached inside and violently torn the organ from its moorings. There were no external entry wounds. They said it had something to do with her miscarriage, but I can see it in their eyes. Not even they know how this happened. I've been alone in this house since it happened. The first week was a blur of bourbon and blackout curtains. But the second week, the air changed. I started hearing her. It's not a haunting like in the movies, it's an atmospheric shift. I'll be in the kitchen and the smell of her jasmine perfume will hit me so hard I choke. And then the crying starts. It isn't a human baby's cry. It's too melodic, too deep, like a cello being played with a rusted saw. It's a sound of pure, unadulterated hunger. And then I hear Laura. Sure, she whispers. I can hear her pacing the floorboards in the nursery above my head. Daddy's coming soon. He's just getting ready. She's singing to it now. A low, distorted version of the lullaby her mother used to sing. She sounds happy. Truly, blissfully happy. She whispers to me through the vents that she finally met him, that without the constrictions of the meat, they can finally be a family. She says he's beautiful. She says he has my eyes and a mouth that never ends. Every night, her voice gets clearer. She tells me how cold it is where she is, but how warm the boy is. She says all I have to do is abandon my human, useless meat and join them. Her words are pulling me in. I'm looking at the razor on the sink, and for the first time in months, I don't feel afraid. I feel invited. I can hear him crying for me, his father. He's so hungry, and Laura says I'm the only thing left to feed him. I think I'm going to go upstairs now. I've kept them waiting long enough.
Next story.
Some debts are paid in skin. Don't look up.
It started in a recovery room. Everything smelled like bleach and old pennies. I woke up from what they told me was a routine hernia repair, but the second I saw my hands, I knew something was wrong. They were pale, hairy, with square fingernails. I didn't recognize them. When the nurse handed me a mirror, I saw a man with thick black hair and blue eyes, piercing, cold eyes. I started screaming because that wasn't me. I don't know if I was supposed to be a woman, or a different man, or just elsewhere, but that face was a mask I couldn't take off. The doctor was this smug guy. He just patted my arm and said it was post-operative delirium and temporary amnesia from the sedation. He told me I'd feel like myself once I got home to my wife and 3 kids. Home was a nightmare. It was a nice house, too nice, but I felt like a ghost haunting someone else's life. This woman, Sarah, would hug me, and her skin felt like sandpaper. The kids, 2 boys and a girl, would stare at me with these wide, unblinking smiles. I went through the photo albums, looking at pictures of me at the beach, at weddings, at Christmas. But looking at those photos felt like looking at a stranger's social media feed. My head wasn't just foggy, it was a void. There wasn't a single childhood memory. No first kiss, no favorite food, nothing. Just a hollow, echoing silence where a soul should be. I couldn't take the emptiness. The nothing was louder than any noise. A few days in, I tried to end it in the garage. I just wanted the silence to be permanent. But they were waiting. Before I could finish it, the garage door slammed. Sarah and the kids weren't crying, they were angry. They dragged me back into the kitchen with a strength that didn't make sense for their sizes. Sarah leaned in close, her breath smelling like rotting meat, and hissed, "Do you have any idea how much we sacrificed to get this vessel? Do you know how much we paid doctor to find a body this clean?" I was paralyzed, pinned to a kitchen chair by these children who felt like lead weights. Sarah explained it while she started opening these heavy, rusted jars she brought up from the cellar. They weren't a family. They were a collective. A cult. They looked for people like the real me, the guy whose body I was wearing. Homeless people, drifters, guys with no family who wouldn't be missed. They pay off hospital staff to wipe the original mind clean using some cocktail of drugs, leaving a physical shell. The master is old, she whispered, and he needs a fresh house. Then she opened the last jar. It was full of gray, slimy chunks, wet, translucent bits of gristle and dark, preserved tissue that looked like it had been harvested from a corpse. It smelled like a stagnant pond and a butcher's been left in the sun. "This is him," she said. The parts of him that wouldn't fit in the ritual. They held my jaw open. I tried to scream, but the oldest son shoved his fingers into my mouth, pulling my tongue down. Sarah took a piece of the gray meat, it looked like a section of an ear or a tongue, slick with black bile, and forced it down my throat. I gagged, the instinctual heave of my stomach trying to reject the putrid mass. It hit the back of my throat and I vomited, a spray of yellow acid and the gray chunk hitting the floor. Sarah didn't even flinch. She picked it up off the linoleum, coated in my own sick, and rammed it back into my mouth, holding her hand over my lips so I had to swallow. "Eat," she crooned. "Incorporate him." I spent hours on that floor. Every time I puked, they gathered the mess, the slime, the half-digested bits of the old man, and forced me to gulp it back down. I could feel the coldness spreading in my chest, a heavy, oily sensation as the master began to settle into the marrow of my bones. My vision started to blur, turning a dark, bruised purple. I'm still here, somewhere deep inside, but I can feel him moving my fingers now. I'm just a passenger in a stolen car that's being driven into the dark.
story.
Some debts are paid in skin. Don't look up.
I'm telling you, I haven't been able to eat since I saw her. You know Dana, she's that horror writer who is always hitting the big leagues with her books. She's always been a bit intense, living alone in that cramped place above the bakery, just caffeine and dark thoughts. Anyway, I was at her reading last night. The place was packed, and the air felt thick, like someone had left meat out too long. She didn't do the usual chapter 1 thing. She stood up, looked us dead in the eye, and read the very last page. It was brutal. She described the main character being pulled into this eternal nothingness. But it wasn't just a metaphor. She described the sound of the character's own ribs snapping inward, one by one, like dry kindling, because a demon was stepping into her body like a suit of clothes. Dina's voice went all low and raspy when she got to the part about the character being conscious while her soul was being shredded into static. The audience was eating it up, totally mesmerized, but I felt this cold weight settle in my gut. When it ended, everyone cheered, but Dana just looked pale. Wiped out. The weirdness started right after. As we were leaving the bookstore, there was this massive, rain-soaked circus poster on the side of the brick building across the street. The clowns on it, they weren't just drunk creeps. I swear to you, their eyes were tilted down, locked right on Dana as she walked to her car. I heard the sound coming from the alleyway, too. Not a dog, not a person. A deep, white growl that sounded like someone gurgling on a mouthful of pennies. Then came this morning. Dana called me, sounding like she was vibrating. She said a dove had slammed into her kitchen window. It didn't die, though. It hit so hard its beak was shattered and hanging by a thread of skin, just flapping its wings against the glass, leaving these long, muddy smears of blood and gray feathers. She said she opened the window to help it, but the thing didn't want help. It was like it was possessed. It scrambled past her, dragging a broken wing across her counter, and hopped straight into the fireplace. It didn't even make a sound. It just sat there in the embers until its feathers caught, and the smell of burning fat and scorched protein filled the whole apartment. The exact same thing happened in her book. Word for word. Things got worse an hour ago. She sent me a photo. I deleted it immediately. It made me want to throw up. She found leakage coming from her pantry. It wasn't water. It was this black, oily sludge that smelled like a morgue. When she tried to wipe it up, she realized it wasn't coming from the wall. It was seeping out of her own shadow on the floor. I went over there to check on her, and the door was cracked open. The smell. God, it hit me like a physical wall. It was the smell of a gut-shot animal left in the sun. I found her in the bedroom. She was standing perfectly still, but her hands were wrong. I saw the skin on the tips of her fingers start to bulge and stretch, like something much larger than a human finger was trying to push its way into the space. Her fingernails were literally lifting off the beds, oozing this yellow, translucent fluid because something was filling her up from the inside. She looked at me, and her eyes were just gone. Just 2 holes into a place where light doesn't exist. She whispered that she could feel him. He wasn't killing her. He was wearing her. Like a dress. She said she could feel her consciousness being pushed into a tiny, screaming corner of her brain while this thing stretched her nerves to fit its own shape. The worst part. As I backed out of the room, terrified out of my mind, I realized she was right. I could see her skin rippling, like there were thousands of tiny teeth moving just under the surface, tailoring her meat to fit a monster. She knows what's coming. She wrote it. She's going to be awake for all of it, forever.
Next story.
Some debts are paid in skin. Don't look up.
You know, I'm not some novelist. I just want to tell you what happened. It was Tuesday. The sky looked like a bruised lawn. Damp heat stuck to my skin. We were at Miller's funeral. The cemetery smelled like cut grass and wet clay. Everything felt heavy. Everyone wore cheap black suits. My tie felt like a noose. I stood near the edge. The ground was soft from the rain. Nobody was talking. Just the sound of a distant lawnmower. The air was thick and still. I stepped back to let his widow through. My heel hit a patch of loose mud. I didn't even have time to yell. I just slipped. The fall felt like an eternity. Gravity turned into a violent shove. I hit the bottom hard. My ribs made a wet snapping sound. The air left my lungs in a gasp. I was staring up at a rectangle of gray sky. It looked so small and far away. Then the smell hit me. It wasn't just dirt. It was something sweet and rotten. It was the smell of a forgotten meat locker. My hands searched the darkness for a grip. They sank into something soft. It wasn't mud. It was cold and slick. My fingers slid into a gap. It felt like wet parchment. I tried to pull myself up. The walls were too slick. I was trapped in a box of filth. I looked down at my hands. They were covered in dark, oily slime. Then I saw the wood. The shovel had cracked the lid below me. I wasn't in an empty hole. I was on top of another casket. An old one. The wood was splintered and jagged. My weight had pushed me right through. I felt a sharp pain in my calf. A piece of rotted oak had sliced me open. The blood felt hot against the cold slime. I tried to shift my weight. The wood groaned and gave way. I fell another foot down. Now I was inside the old box. I felt hair against my face. Long, stringy, and damp hair. It smelled like stagnant pond water. I reached out to push myself away. My hand landed on a jawbone. It detached with a sickening pop. I felt the teeth scatter like dice. Something moved under my palm. It was a swarm of black beetles. They crawled up my sleeves. They bit into my neck. I screamed, but dirt fell into my mouth. I tasted iron and ancient dust. I looked down into the shadows. The body beneath me wasn't just bones. It was a slurry of gray skin and fluid. My leg was deep in the chest cavity. I could feel the ribs scraping my bone. Every movement made a squelching sound. It sounded like boots walking through deep mud. The people above didn't hear me. They were singing a hymn. Their voices were thin and ghostly. I clawed at the mud walls. My fingernails peeled back from the beds. I didn't care about the pain. I just needed to get out of the rot. I looked at the corpse again. Its eye sockets were filled with white mold. The jaw was frozen in a silent scream. My blood was dripping into its open mouth. It looked like it was drinking me. The red stood out against the gray skin. I felt a pull on my ankle. Something was holding me down. It felt like cold, leathery fingers. They were digging into my open wound. I kicked frantically at the darkness. The squelching noise got louder. I felt a pop in my knee. The grip on my ankle tightened. I looked down and saw movement. The gray fingers were curling around my bone. They were pulling me deeper into the sludge. I grabbed a handful of dirt from above. It crumbled and fell into my eyes. I was being buried from the inside out. The smell was thick enough to swallow. I felt the pressure on my chest. The old casket was collapsing inward. It was hugging me like a lover. I could feel the cold ribs of the dead. They were interlocking with my own broken ribs. The hymn ended abruptly. I heard the first shovel of dirt hit. It landed on my head with a thud. They were starting the burial. They didn't know I was down here. I tried to scream again. Only a gurgle of blood and mud came out. Another shovel hit my shoulder. The light from the sky was vanishing. I looked down one last time. The corpse's mouth was wide open now. It was waiting for the dirt to fill us both. The fingers on my ankle pulled hard. My leg snapped at the shin. I felt the marrow leak out. The pain was a white-hot flash. Then the darkness became absolute. The dirt filled my nose. The dead man and I became one. We were just a pile of wet meat. I am still waiting for the shovel to stop.
Next story.
Some debts are paid in skin. Don't look up.
Next story is yours. Take a look at the shadow in the corner of your room. Are you sure it was that shape a minute ago? Subscribe or be the next in line.